Ladies and gentlemen, Gordon Laxer.
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm very pleased to have been invited by Janice Morris to be part of the opening night of KDocs Film Festival. I always wanted to live in Vancouver. I loved running around the seawall, soaking up the scenes and the scents. I'm also very impressed by movements started in BC. What an illustrious list. Occupy Wall Street, Greenpeace, the Raging Grannies, Clayoquot Sound, the Great Bear Rainforest Blockade, giant peace rallies, stopping pipelines, first the Northern Gateway Pipeline, next Kinder Morgan. Occupy Wall Street, so there's a photo-based exhibit now at the Museum of Vancouver on how demonstrations have shaped Vancouver's identity. And I haven't seen it, but I understand it's very good. Well, Greenpeace is perhaps the world's best known and most effective environmental organization. If I hadn't seen the superb 2015 documentary, How to Change the World, I wouldn't have remembered that Greenpeace was started in 1971 by Robert Hunter and other Vancouver anti-war activists who set sail in an old fishing boat to stop US atomic testing in Alaska, which won, and there was a documentary, that documentary won the World Cinema Documentary Special Jury Award. Although it announced itself to the world on the Brooklyn Bridge and the 2-month-long camp in Zuccotti Park in New York City, the Occupy Wall Street movement started in Vancouver. The call came from Adbusters, the Vancouver-based anti-consumer magazine of artists, activists, writers, pranksters, students, and educators. The call to peacefully occupy Wall Street quickly went global. And the Occupy movement was partly inspired by the Arab Spring, the Spanish indignados, and international anti-austerity movements. Movements are contagious. An eruption and success in one part of the world leads to other eruptions, often far away. It's the best kind of virus. If not for the Occupy movement and its message, we are the 99%, Bernie Sanders would still be an obscure Democratic Socialist senator from Vermont. Jeremy Corbyn, under whose leadership the Labour Party nearly won last year's UK election, and he's favored to win the next election, he would still be a little-known socialist backbencher. Without Occupy, we might not have had the inspiring LEAP manifesto, led by Naomi Klein, Avi Lewis, and many others, who are meeting in Ottawa at this very moment to try and spark a Corbyn-Sanders type of movement in Canada, and we really need one. The LEAP manifesto starts this way. Canada is facing the deepest crisis in recent memory. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has acknowledged shocking details about the violence of Canada's near past. Deepening poverty and inequality are a scar on the country's present, and Canada's record on climate change is a crime against humanity's future. These facts are all the more jarring because they depart so dramatically from our stated values: respect for Indigenous rights, internationalism, human rights, diversity, and environmental stewardship. End of quote. Clayton Thomas Mueller is a Matthias Colom Cree. He worked for the Indigenous Tar Sands campaign and now for 350.org. And he wrote, "In the past 30 years of Canadian environmentalism, there has not been a major environmental victory without First Nations at the helm, asserting their Indigenous rights and title." And he wrote that Indigenous people are in the lead to protect the sacredness of Mother Earth from toxic contamination and corporate exploitation, to support our peoples to build sustainable local economies rooted in the sacred fires of our traditions. Well, we talk a lot about reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. Talk matters, but don't just talk and don't act. Joining hands with our Indigenous sisters and brothers to stop the destructive schemes of big oil in their tracks and preserve the land, water, and air is reconciliation in motion. Pipelines are at the forefront of campaigns to remake Canada into the country of our ideals. Build a pipeline today, and it will take until mid-century to pay off its capital costs by shipping tar sands oil on it full bore. Our unborn children and grandchildren will feel its effects in 2050. It matters that we inform and are informed. It could be in the written form, it could be in documentaries, and we must take action now to make a better future. Big oil corporations are powerful. They press governments, even NDP ones, to advocate for them and to use state power to crush citizens, push citizens aside, and help bulldoze pipelines across freshwater, unceded Indigenous lands and to coastal waters. But big oil often loses, especially when Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples join hands to fight together. The Mackenzie Valley Natural Gas Pipeline was proposed in the Northwest Territories in 1974 and killed in 1977 by massive Indigenous opposition in alliance with Vancouver Judge Thomas Berger. Enbridge's Northern Gateway oil pipeline to Kitimat was killed in January 2017. TransCanada's Energy East pipeline, the biggest proposed oil pipeline in North America, was killed last October. Imperial Oil's revived Mackenzie Valley gas pipeline, approved in 2016, killed last December. Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain oil pipeline, the twinning was approved and backed by the Trudeau and Alberta governments. When will it die? If enough citizens stand up and block it, very soon. Bravo to the kayakers, the activists who chain themselves to machinery and other blockaders. We see these things from east of the Rockies and are inspired. Well, what do all these movements have to do with the documentary film festival? Well, really good documentaries fire you up, galvanize you into action, and are magnificent works of film making well worth watching. Some are brilliantly energizing films that bring real-world justice into the limelight. Some films have had a fantastically huge impact. Davis Guggenheim's An Inconvenient Truth about Al Gore's mission to wake up everyone to global warming was one. Another was the impact of the Vancouver-based documentary, The Corporation. Written by UBC law professor Joel Bakken, portraying the corporation as a sociopath, the documentary was held in commercial theaters, held over internationally, and has a 90% critics and audience rating, and it won 26 awards. Well, Exxon and Shell Oil personify all that can be wrong with corporations. They usually have the deck loaded in their favor, but they don't always win. David sometimes defeats Goliath. Big Oil is starting to divest from the tar sands because they lose money when the price of diluted bitumen is very low, as it is now. Bitumen's price is low because of a lack of pipelines. Good, chalk that up to citizens' victories. But it's time to stop the tar sands at their source so we don't have to kill one pipeline after the other And this is my mission, is to phase out the tar sands by 2030. Over a quarter of Canada's emissions come from producing natural gas and oil, mainly for export to the United States. And the tar sands is Canada's largest and fastest growing source of emissions. Those emissions have grown more than 4 times since 1990, and they will grow 40% more by 2030 to total 100 megatons a year under Canada's and Alberta's climate plan. They call this the Great Climate Plan that they've adopted, and they are allowing the tar sands to grow by 40%, just so big oil can pollute and profit. And their emissions from the tar sands will entirely cancel out Alberta's carbon tax and plans to make coal-free electricity by 2030. So if we allow tar sands greenhouse gases to grow that much, it's going to prevent Canada from reaching its feeble 2030 Paris emissions target. You remember when Justin Trudeau was in Paris and he said, Canada is back? Well, that's talk, and action is what is important. All G8 countries, including Canada, promised to cut greenhouse gases by 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. If they're allowed to rise and to stay at 100 megatons a year, the tar sands will take up 81% of Canada's total emissions by mid-century, just so big oil can profit from polluting. Alberta is landlocked. Big oil there needs to win support from other provinces to cross their territory to get oil to tidewater. If we allow them to build 3 more pipelines, Enbridge Line 3, Keystone XL, and Kinder Morgan, they will lock in extraction, export, and emissions of tar sands oil for another 20 or 30 years. And of course, the pipeline companies and the oil corporations would apply political pressure to continue tar sands production until mid-century. For the sake of all life on this planet, we cannot let that happen. That's where citizens come in. Hem in the tar sands. Keep tar sands oil in the soil. Hit big oil hard enough in the pocketbook, and they will pull out. And in fact, they already are pulling out. Total ASA, which is France's largest oil corporation, started to exit from the tar sands in September 2016. Norway's Statoil left completely in December, 3 months later, losing a bundle. Royal Dutch Shell and Houston-based Marathon Oil and ConocoPhillips sold off huge tar sands investments last March. BP and Chevron are actively looking at pulling out. This is time to rejoice. And I'm going to, having lived in Alberta for 30 years, I'm going to help to start things off, and I promise by starting to buy BC wines. Since the international oil price crashed in 2014, 17 major sands projects have been postponed or canceled, accounting for almost half of the major shelved projects in the world. And plans to expand sands production after 2020 are paltry. Last December, the World Bank said it will virtually stop lending for oil and gas projects. The City of New York just last month announced that it will sue the world's 5 largest oil corporations and it will divest $5 billion from fossil fuel corporations. The tide is turning. Should Albertans pray for another oil boom or view its downturn positively as the start of the phasing out of the sands and the phasing in of a low-carbon future? A phase-out would be good for Albertans, all Canadians, and all humans. Trudeau acknowledged this last winter, and he said in Peterborough, quote, "We can't shut them down tomorrow. We need to phase out the oil sands to manage the transition off fossil fuels." But a couple of months later, he showed his true colors when he spoke to oil executives in Houston, Texas. And he said, quote, "No country would find 173 billion barrels of oil in the ground and leave them there," end of quote. Well, Canada should be the first one then. Good documentaries can reveal this kind of hypocrisy so well. Put a clip of Trudeau making grand promises to the world that Canada is back, then show him defending tar sands pipelines. Today is the golden era of documentaries because it's so much cheaper now. With portable cameras and affordable data and nonlinear digital editing, filmmaker Lucy Walker says these new technologies mean we can make complicated, beautifully crafted and cinematic films about real-life stories. Independent documentaries are no longer beholden to interests with big pockets. As Josh Fox said, a documentary is a pathway to renegade, independent reporting on an in-depth investigative fashion. It can do so with a compassionate lens. It allows people to speak in a way that is more human than in the mainstream media. Well, I've done enough talking. It's time to move on to the main course. Bring on the documentaries. Thank you.